few folks have arrived that I'd like to recognize. First of all, I failed to recognize at the very beginning of the session a state school board member who is a friend of education reform and not a friend of the Common Core standard, and that is Sarah Fowler. Would you stand for that? And then apparently the Ohio House has let out a session because we've had a host of them come in. And before I introduce everybody, I'd like to call out a few names in particular who have either sponsored or co-sponsored House Bill 237, which you should consider supporting. Obviously, we've already recognized Andy Thompson, but give him another round in a minute. I know you want in a minute. I know you want to. Other co-sponsors of that bill that I saw in the room are Representative Becker, Hood, Boos, and Beck. If you would stand. Because I know what it's like to be a member of the General Assembly. Just because someone's not on a bill does not mean you should not give up hope on them. We have other representatives who have taken time out of their busy schedule tonight, or maybe just drinking with lobbyists, I'm not certain which, to be with us here tonight. And I think I recognized Representative Rule, Brenner, Beakey, Butler, Green, Condit, and Hackett. If you all would stand and take a bow, I'd be grateful. Rutherford's in the room, and I believe he's also a co-sponsor of 237, right? Yes. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the senators who appear to have hung out here the whole night. And so we don't want to forget you all again. Thank you for coming tonight. I do kind of feel like Jesus, well, not Jesus by any stretch of imagination, my wife will tell you that, but I think there's 33 senators and I saw 3. Guys, got a little work to do in the caucus there, it looks like. All right, so let's get to some of your questions. There was a host of good questions. Obviously, we're going to ask every single one of them, of all 5 of our panelists, in 15 minutes. Ms. Day-Shumate did her best to try to pull these together into some sort of semblance that would ask questions that would kind of capture the general theme of the night. I believe we're all going to be in the auditorium for a while afterwards, and so certainly please connect with these fine panelists afterwards if your question does not get specifically answered. And I think if it's okay, I'm going to take one of these up front just because it's easy. There was a lot of requests of whether or not this was being videotaped or audio recorded, and the answer is yes. And the answer, it should be available to you on OhioansAgainstCommonCore.com. OhioansAgainstCommonCore.com. If there are those of you who are for Common Core, we encourage you to go to the website anyway. It's very benign. No viruses on it. You can pick up the entire event on the website. There are no viruses on it, right, Heidi? Let's go then to our panelists. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask 4 questions. There's obviously 5 of you. I'm trying to tailor these to information. If someone that I don't ask the question to has something very relevant, please add to it. But we want to respect everybody's time tonight. So I'm going to start with the question, and I'm going to point this, I think, to Mr. Gass. And one of the questions is, what are our options to escape this right now? And let me say, don't think legislatively. We're going to talk about another question. But in other words, if I'm a parent and I can't count on Ohio getting out of this, or concerned where the government's going, what do I do if I'm a parent and I want to avoid these potential standards being inflicted on my child's education?
So, that's a great question. So, it really does vary from state to state, and different parents or groups of parents are doing different things. So, in Maine, for example, they put it on the ballot as an initiative petition. That's one way to try to repeal it. In other states, they've tried to, address it through the Board of Education. Other states have tried to force, legislative hearings, etc. But there's not any one strategy that's going to be best applicable for everyone. And I think that, from my point of view, the best thing to do is probably try to reach out to your congressman, because the fact is that I think what needs to happen next is that the congressional committee on education needs to have hearings on this, because at a minimum, there are federal laws that are being violated.
Could I just amend them slightly? Non-chartered schools, homeschooling, kind of the off-the-grid, if you will, schooling options. Is that something these parents should consider?
Absolutely. I think you have to think about the short term. If your kid is in the school, what you're going to augment, whether that's Russian math or Kumon or what have you, or whether it's getting a list from Dr. Moore or from Sandy Stotsky on the kind of books that kids should be reading. I would think about augmenting it. My own gut tells me that the first people to sue on this will be the homeschoolers. They just produced that excellent film, and the Homeschool Legal Defense Association is a big driver. And my guess is they'll be the first ones to sue it. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if entirely answered your question, but I think that the troubling thing, and we talked a little bit about at the end of my remarks, was that because so many archdioceses have adopted, there's some that have pulled out, like Wisconsin. And charter schools that have to submit to state tests as well. The goal here from the Common Core advocates' point of view is to try to herd all these different options into one set of standards. So I'm not sure there's an immediate escape, but I think that the best thing that I guess I would recommend is try to figure out ways to augment what's being taught already with things that are of better quality, and then reach out to your congressman, because I really think that the next step is to force this in Congress and to force hearings in this in D.C.
And the deference to time, I don't want to again open it up, but anybody else have anything they really want to add that's important? Okay, we'll move on. Let's move to somebody. I apologize, Jane. As long as it's not negative.
It's not, of course not. One thing, I think that we need a mind shift here, because what we were told all over the place is, well, SAT is going to be aligned to it, ACT, all this stuff, so you may not like it, but you got to do it. No, we're free-born American citizens. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to follow that. Somebody will come along and make a new test. The Catholic schools can make a test. Heidi was talking about that today, which is a great idea. There are all kinds of ways. If people refuse to do this, there'll be ways that you could get out of it. But we need to understand that we got to get out of the rut.
Jane, just keep the microphone, because the next question is going to be towards you. I thought it was pretty clear why the government wants all this data control, but we got a lot of questions about why are they really collecting all this data. Can you just take 30 seconds to a minute?
Because the idea is that you want to control, you want to manage the economy, you want to manage society, because the old progressive idea that goes back 100 years and more is that the country is too complex now. The founding principles are really outdated because things were simpler then. Now we have very complex problems, and so we can't leave it up to people like us, because we obviously don't know what we're doing. We have to leave it to the experts, the people who are well-trained, the technicians, the administrators. They are going to fix things. They're going to solve the problems. This is an old progressive idea, and now if you're going to carry that forward, the best way to do it is to have the data. You can't make decisions without the data. And so that's why they want to get the data. This is the techno-progressive dream, to know everything that there is to know about every person in society, so you can sort of plug him in where he fits. And you have the crony capitalists, the politically favored companies represented by the political chamber of commerce, who will say, well, we need these workers and we need these workers and all of that. And so they say, okay, well, here we have the data. These are the people who took these courses. These are the people who did this. These are the people who show a lot of grit, tenacity, and perseverance. And that's what you want, isn't it? And it's a workforce development model. So it's all a matter of control.
Anyone else? Let's move to a question we got repeatedly, and I'm not certain, frankly, who to throw this to, so I'm just going to throw it to the table and ask you to respect the audience's time. The question is, why did the Catholic schools adopt this? We've got a lot of Catholic schools in Ohio who are considered chartered. In other words, they're not chartered schools as we classically think of it, but they receive ancillary funding from the state for curriculum, etc. Why have the Catholic schools moved in a direction in support of this? I was thinking originally of you, Mr. Gass, but frankly any of you, because I'm not certain who has the best.
So as well as Massachusetts' public system has done over the last 20 years, the few measures that we have in common is that the Catholic system in Massachusetts outperforms the Massachusetts public system. And the previous standards that they used in the Archdiocese schools in Boston were the previous Massachusetts standards that correlate with all these remarkable gains. But what happened, and our Catholic schools do not take any state tests as they do in Indiana. But there's two reasons that they did. One of them is this inevitability thing that Jane was talking about. The other thing is that we know that in several different circumstances that the Archdiocese schools across the country are in financially difficult shape. And that the Gates money is a $40 billion foundation has been giving grants to. So that's the short. The short answer is that they see it as in their self-interest because this is where SAT and ACT and the national testing is going. But there's also the sort of fiscally beleaguered shape that they're in, and the fact that the people who fund Common Core have a lot of money.
Other comments? Okay. It is not to disrespect the two good doctors in the middle. Fantastic speeches, but please, again, feel free to weigh in. The last question I'm going to direct, though, to Dr. Moore, and that is legislatively. I think Mr. Gass already answered this in some ways, but what's the best route to get out of this? So the crowd has obviously picked up on the fact that Indiana has worked to repeal this. Obviously, we've got a bill in the House and the Senate through Representative Thompson to repeal this. But what's the best path forward? And I'm going to expand this and say, if the federal government continues to just attach carrots of money to the effort and even ties it to Title I funding, how do these folks best engage in removing this from Ohio's curriculum standards?
Well, nobody's going to re-engage until the politicians feel the heat. And that means primaries, and that means the general. That I have, and I've been told this, I haven't actually done the research, but I think when people go out on the campaign trail, even if they're beloved long-time legislators or, dare I say, governors and school boards, they need to answer some questions. And so if there happens to be a governor in a prominent Midwestern state whose capital is named for a famous explorer, who sends his children to a private school that is not going to be aligned to the Common Core, much as Barack Obama sends his children to the Sidwell Friends School, which is also where the Clintons went, which is also where the Gores went, or Chelsea went, that is not going to be aligned to the Common Core. Shouldn't there be some answer for this? Why should this not be the leading question on the campaign trail?
Something nice about Jeb Bush, and I'm going to say something not so nice about Jeb Bush. The fact is that Jeb Bush did some good things in Florida. Florida was a very, very low-performing state, which he brought up to slightly below average. The fact is that this guy knew nothing about academic standards and had no reputation for caring about academic standards in the 2 terms that he was in Florida. And when we've been going to all these different states, it's clear that not only has he gotten Gates money to advocate for this, but he's bending the ears of lots of governors and promising lots of things to people. So I've heard that Ohio is an important state for presidential elections. I'm not sure if that's true or not. And I think that's pretty probable that Jeb Bush wants to run for president. So I would just encourage you to make your opinions about this topic known to him.
I'm going to say one more thing. Sorry to jump in here again. But when I say press them on the campaign trail, I mean press them with the standards. Because what the legislators have, and these state school board members and people like that, is they have their talking points that they've been fed. And they're comfortable within those talking points. But as soon as you start quizzing them on the standards, they crumble. So if you say, please defend standard RFK-3.A, which says that there are more pronunciations for the consonants that we can even dream of. Tell us how that's a standard that has to be in the school. I would like to know. And what they'll say, of course, I know the predictable answer, well, I'm not an expert in this. Well, 45% of your budget's in education, and you're on the education committee or whatever. You're telling me you don't know something that I know as a citizen? Let them have to answer those questions. Make them answer those questions, and we'll see what happens in these elections.
My job is to get us off stage by 9:30, and so I'd encourage you, I see a couple hands, just please engage with these folks in the lobby. Let me just wrap this up by saying there was one other question, and that is this constitutional? Well, I think the obvious answer is no, and unfortunately that hasn't mattered that much in the last several rounds of legislation. So here's my takeaways from what can we do. House Bill 237 deserves your read and consideration. This is a C3 event, so I'm not going to say go do something about it, but I'm going to say consider its impact and importance in Ohio. I would also say to you that you need to stay engaged with Ohioans Against Common Core. Obviously, Heidi and Taya are leading the charge along with their ancillary efforts. One more thing. Government continues, and again, as I opened up and said, some of you may have misunderstood what I was saying. This is about all government can do. They can only throw out these broad, sweeping policy efforts to fix what is very much individual issues. And so what I would say to you is that let's not forget this in the Common Core area. We see it in healthcare, we see it in energy policy, we see it in taxation. That what is really at stake here is a government that's obviously grown too big and is taking too much of our money, is trying to get data about our kids. But this is a systemic issue with government, and that's something we can't forget. We as activists who care deeply about our kids and the economy and energy have to care deeply enough about government to understand its limitations. And I would say to you that the real answer to this will be when parents just like you rise up and take on this issue, and don't stop at Common Core. Don't stop when Andy Thompson's bill is passed and enacted and signed because you've done all the right things and put pressure on the governor and done all the right things, God willing. And that we win this fight doesn't stop here. This fight doesn't stop here because until we have parents who are in charge of their kids' education and have the access to your tax dollars to make that happen, we will not see the true market reforms necessary in education. And the final thing we must do is not stop it to this several hundred gathering of people. We must talk to our friends and our neighbors and at our church and our parishes and explain not only the fallacies of Common Core, but the fallacies of broad sweeping government solutions to what are things that are up to you and I and our individual liberties. Hope you connect with us out there. Give Heidi and Taya a great round of applause in this great.
The reason why Jeb Bush is such a huge proponent for Common Core is that Neil Bush, his brother, is developing Ignite Learning, which is an online curriculum associated with Common Core. The Bush family is heavily invested in it. The Saudis are heavily invested in it. And if you want to read about it, it's on WND.com. Look, just put Common Core in the search bar.
Thank you. Thank you.